These days, when it comes to Hollywood, it feels like we're mourning good quality, good scripts, talent, but one thing we haven't yet begun to mourn is the death of the flawed hero. Hey y'all, SnarkyJay cosplay here. I might be the only weirdo that does this, but somehow I think I'm probably not. I really love analyzing characters, especially well-written, layered, complex characters, and what I've come to realize is that the modern hero in modern Hollywood media made for the modern audience is much less of a complicated character and way more some bored scriptwriter's Pinterest board with abs drawn on. These days, not only are movies and scripts getting worse, but it feels like our heroes are getting less and less complex, and I've asked myself the question, why is the flawed hero disappearing all over media? Audiences today and in the past really connect to imperfect, flawed characters, and yet these days Hollywood works harder and harder to avoid moral complexity in order to play it safe, push agendas, and of course, please algorithms. Alright, so flawed hero might be a bit of a buzzword, but let's break down what is the flawed hero. A flawed hero is a protagonist, male or female, who isn't morally perfect, they're often emotionally unstable, and they're not always right. The flawed hero is a character with a ton of baggage. They often have personal demons like guilt, trauma. They usually have some form of bad habits or a tendency to make impulsive decisions. There is usually some aspect of moral ambiguity, so they might lie for a specific purpose, or better yet, they do the wrong thing for the right reason. And most importantly, the flawed hero always has actual growth. They're not powerful because they start off perfect. They're powerful because over the course of the piece of media they're in, they become better. Why exactly do we root for the flawed hero? I'll give you a couple of words. Human nature, relatability, redemption. They make mistakes, they struggle, and they change. And we don't relate to them in spite of those mistakes and imperfections. We relate to them because of those. And in case you're not getting the picture, let's go over some really well-known flawed heroes. We can definitely start off with Tony Stark from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He starts off as arguably a narcissistic billionaire who profits off of war. And his entire character arc is all about reckoning with the consequences of his own actions. And the way that his arc wraps up in Endgame is so powerful because he's finally grown into somebody who puts everybody else before himself. Yes, Tony Stark is brilliant and charismatic, but he is also incredibly deeply human. He screws up constantly and his victories feel earned because he grows past his ego, and when he finally has to sacrifice himself to save everyone else, it means that much more because he initially was the guy that would never make that sacrifice play. A flawed hero from the gaming world, let's talk about Joel from The Last of Us, and no, I'm not talking about Pedro Pascal. Joel in The Last of Us game carries a ton of grief. He's also incredibly violent. He lost his daughter in an incredibly traumatic way, and that makes him not only emotionally closed off, but he has a tendency to be a little bit more brutal than he probably needs to be. He does bond with Ellie and does everything he can to protect her, but in that protection, he lies to her and makes incredibly selfish choices, all in the name of keeping them together. His decision at the end of the first Last of Us to essentially doom humanity to keep Ellie alive, it's incredibly morally wrong, but it's also a really deeply human thing to do. Joel in and of himself is a broken man who does terrible things in the name of unconditional love. He's not heroic because he's right, he's heroic because he's real, and it's really not that hard for us to be able to see ourselves in the way that he behaves. We have to talk about Ellen Ripley in the Alien franchise. She doesn't start out fearless. She's scared, she's angry, and she's barely making it out alive. And her strength comes from pushing through fear, not by being invincible. Ellen Ripley isn't a badass because she's emotionless or perfect. She's a badass because she feels everything very deeply, and yet she fights anyway. And I'm gonna give you one more example before we sum things up and move right on to why we're not getting characters like this anymore. We have to talk about one of my favorite movies of all time, Gladiator. Of course, I'm talking about Maximus Decimus Meridius. God, that's a lot of yeses. Maximus, for most of the movie, is driven by the idea of grief and revenge, not righteousness. But he ultimately finds peace and redemption through making a greater sacrifice that goes so much beyond his initial revenge mission. And that's what makes his ending hit and what makes him feel like a true flawed hero. So let's talk about the modern problem, and that is that perfect actually just equals boring. The strong female lead of the modern era is invincible, emotionally unavailable, and never wrong. Male leads are often bland, entirely too sanitized, and they trauma dump their entire story without ever facing any real consequences as a result of their actions. Let's break these down just a little further. We're gonna kick things off with the strong female lead, my personal favorite. This trope has become so standardized that it's basically a template where you can watch most strong female leads and just check off all the boxes. She's never wrong, she is emotionally unavailable and closed off because vulnerability in the eyes of Hollywood when coming from a woman means weakness. She beats everyone in a fight, unquestionably, no training needed, and regardless of any size differences. What do you mean a 90-pound, 4-foot woman cannot flip over a 6'5" sumo wrestler? That sounds sexist. Authority figures usually dismiss her, but she is always proven right. She often lacks the opportunity to have a real arc because she's already the very best and everybody around her just needs to catch up. The strong female lead of today is meant to be empowering, but it's actually totally dehumanizing. These characters are written basically as symbols or slogans. They're really not meant to be relatable. Two examples off the top of my head, of course, we have our favorite Mary Sue, Rey from Star Wars. She instantly masters the Force. She beats a trained Sith with no real struggle. She's also somehow a perfect pilot of everything she's ever flown, and she basically faces no real consequences over a 3-film trilogy. Then, of course, we have Carol Danvers from Captain Marvel, whose entire arc is basically that the power was within her and she was perfect all along, and really does not change or grow throughout the entire film. These women are not written to be real or relatable. They are essentially idealized to the point of detachment. And when every male character around them is written to be either completely incompetent or totally disposable for the sake of making them look stronger, then audiences just check out. But we're not just bitching about the strong female lead here, we're also bitching about the sanitized male lead. Male protagonists are also falling victim to what I'm calling studio smoothing, which basically means they're having all their rough edges just sanded off until there's nothing left but the outline of a guy who's just there. The sanitized male lead is often emotionally neutered or one-dimensional. He lacks real conflict, either because he's too passive or too flawless. He usually becomes a supporting character in his own film, either to prop up a different character or to push a message. And he usually has trauma, but it doesn't affect him past like a monologue or a moment where a single tear falls down his cheek and he never addresses it again. Two examples of sanitized male leads that really bug the out of me. Sam Wilson in the MCU post-Endgame. He has so much potential and so much interesting that they could be doing with him. But instead, his entire story has become a meandering, preachy side quest about who Captain America should be as opposed to who this Captain America actually is. By the time he got his own movie, he basically became a side character in a bloated film that felt way more focused on Hulk drama and rehashing what they had already gone over in the Disney Plus series Falcon and Winter Soldier, as opposed to focusing on Sam Wilson really stepping into the shoes of Captain America. And on the Star Wars front, does anybody remember the first Star Wars movie to not make a load of cash? Yeah, I'm talking about Solo, a Star Wars story. The original Han Solo is iconic because he is messy, he's self-serving, he's cocky, he's emotionally stunted, not entirely trustworthy, but over the course of 3 movies, we see him change. He grows from I only care about me to I'm fighting for something bigger than myself. So naturally, when Disney gave him an origin movie, they sanded all that complexity away. Han Solo starts off the movie basically already idealistic. The movie tells us he's a scoundrel, but they show us a guy that's basically a golden retriever with a blaster. He's totally sanitized. And another Star Wars character, just one more, I'm never gonna get over what they did to Finn in the sequel trilogy. He's set up with an incredible arc in The Force Awakens. A Force-sensitive rebel who used to be a stormtrooper. It doesn't get much cooler than that. And then, you know, he gets reduced to just yelling Rey and being comic relief. Male characters are either flattened into symbols or sidelined entirely. So why exactly is Hollywood so hell-bent on giving us these shitty male and female characters? For one, I think studios are more and more afraid of backlash. I think they look at female characters these days and they're like, you can't show a woman making mistakes. That's sexist. She can't be wrong about anything. We'll get canceled on Twitter. It's like studios these days are basically just writing while also being terrified of being accused of sexism, racism, or any form of insensitivity. And so they basically overcorrect by writing super perfect, sanitized characters that won't get them in trouble. The result then is we get characters that feel way more like statements than like actual people. So to put it in something that fits on a bumper sticker, risk aversion meets committee-driven writing and results in bland, safe characters. The whole writing by committee thing, that's basically a really real problem that's plaguing Hollywood right now. Movies these days are being written to essentially hit Hollywood checklists as opposed to tell good stories. So when 12 executives with summer and winter homes looking to keep those homes give 12 different notes to writers, essentially you're never gonna get a complex character, you always get a safe one. Flaws are risky, and nuance is hard, so they just don't bother. They're also choosing agendas over arcs. When characters are used to push an agenda or a message, the message becomes more important than that character and the entire story being told. So instead of people with flaws, we get mascots willing to make speeches. And finally, appealing to everyone means appealing to no one. That's a very real marketing thing that I heard a ton in college, is if you're talking to everybody, then really you're talking to nobody. And somehow Hollywood seemed to forget that when it comes to the writer's room. They want global appeal, so they know they can't really make a character too edgy and outside the box. So they aim to write essentially a lowest common denominator character, someone who's broadly likable, broadly unproblematic, and looks good on a t-shirt. Deep-seated flaws make executives nervous because not everyone is gonna get it, so it's easier to just erase all these flaws from these characters and make them uncomplicated. It's literally become a game not of writing good characters, but just writing characters that won't get them yelled at online. So how and why doesn't this work? Well, that's actually a really easy answer, but I'm gonna make it a lot longer than it needs to be. Audiences want to see the journey. We don't want to start at the finish line. People don't root for perfect because there's nowhere to go from perfect. We root for possible. So we want to start down here and see the character end up here. We don't want to start up here because what the hell's the point? Characters that have no flaws feel fake. They feel corporate. Why should we care about a hero who has no flaws, never struggles, and really it was always meant to win? Franklin D. Roosevelt once made this incredible quote: "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." And that's the whole thing behind the flawed hero. It's not perfection or not being afraid to fail. It's the knowledge that they have to push through that fear and take risks to become something better, to achieve something. I mean, look at Luke Skywalker compared to Rey No-Name Palpatine Skywalker. Luke starts off as a whiner. He rushes into danger and gets literally wrecked in The Empire Strikes Back. And then he grows. We see this phenomenal character arc that wraps up so beautifully in Return of the Jedi. Rey is great at everything, almost immediately, and she never suffers any loss that matters. One of these feels real, and the other one feels like fan fiction, and I'll let you pick which one is which. Also, flawed characters just make for better arcs. If a character starts off flawed, broken, emotionally vulnerable, and they grow throughout their story, then that actually becomes a huge emotional payoff for us, the audience. Their victories feel earned because they were never guaranteed. And the reason why all of this is so important is that when everyone is the best of the best and strong, then nobody is. Strength without a struggle behind it is just noise. It's meaningless. We love underdogs, reluctant saviors, and anti-heroes because they've had to struggle to become the things that we admire. And that struggle, that hero's journey, is something that we as human beings are intrinsically drawn to. Perfect characters are always going to survive the story, but the flawed ones are the ones that we're going to remember. And it sucks that that's such a rarity these days, and I know it seems very doom and gloom that I wore black and I'm saying we're mourning the flawed hero, but I don't think that all hope is lost. I think we have some really good flawed heroes, which means that people are still trying to write this story, and every once in a while somebody breaks through the noise of modern age writing and happens to make something good. Pointing out a few somewhat recent good examples of flawed heroes, I am failing every day the challenge to stop talking about Final Fantasy XVI. Look at Clive Rosfield. He starts off lugging around a load of baggage like rage, trauma, survivor's guilt. He makes mistakes, he trusts the wrong people, he frequently lashes out, and initially he runs from responsibility. His entire arc is rooted in loss, identity, and dealing with the burden of power. Ultimately, he becomes a protector, not because he's chosen to be a protector, but because he himself chooses to fight for others. Clive is not some perfect savior. He's a man trying not to be consumed by grief. And that's what makes his moments of strength feel so earned and so satisfying. Please play Final Fantasy XVI so they make more of these. Then we have my controversial choice, which is Cassian Andor from Andor. He begins his arc as a selfish survivor, he is a thief, and ultimately he's a killer. He doesn't care about living after the rebellion, he just wants to survive. But the system breaks him down, and after he's broken down, he chooses to rise and to fight. His rebellion ultimately is personal before it becomes political, and that's what makes him compelling. And a not so recent example, even though this movie falls apart in the third act, I would be remiss not to acknowledge 2017's Wonder Woman, which for me is a source of personal inspiration in so many ways. Wonder Woman in this movie starts off naive, overtly idealistic, and emotionally raw, and her belief in justice is challenged at every step of the way as she's shown the true brutality and cruelty of man. She has to reconcile her ideals with reality. She fails, she doubts, she chooses the people she loves, and she stands back up. Her compassion is her power, and she earns every bit of it. So what am I really saying here? The best stories come from characters who are broken and are trying to rise above that. And I'm reminded of Alfred and Bruce in Batman Begins.
Why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
That's what our heroes should teach us. When they're perfect from the start, they're doomed because we're not perfect. We need to see that they have flaws and they can rise above. That's the story of a winner. Victory without challenge is meaningless, and therefore they're meaningless. When they struggle, when they fight, when they rise above something that feels ultimately bigger than them, it really resonates with us. And that's why the flawed hero is so important, and that's what Hollywood just doesn't get. We don't need perfect heroes. We just want real ones. And that's all from me. I've been SnarkyJay. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. For more SnarkyJay, be sure to check me out on Instagram. And if you'd like to support me, this channel, and my content creation, do check out and consider subscribing to my Patreon for exclusive photo shoot sets and cosplay content. I'll add links to all of those in the description below. And let me know what flawed character stands out to you the most in the comments below.